Hey everybody, I'm Jason Mefford and I am back with Brad Miller and we're walking the spiritual path. Do a little different introduction this time,
Change
but
things up.
to
Yeah.
change things up a little bit. But today's discussion is a little bit about walking a path, like literally, like
Could be,
spiritual
yeah.
travel. Okay. Because that was one that we had kind of come up with. I just got back from a 2 week trip. So obviously I was traveling for 2 weeks. And the reason, it was for family reasons. And so you might think, well, that's just a family thing. That's not really a spiritual trip or spiritual travel. That's like going to an ashram someplace or a holy site in the world. But we'll talk about kind of both, right? Because I think, just like we've shared on here before, we're doing a lot more than what we actually think we're doing, even when we're doing it. And so, even though what people might consider to be just a family trip, right, to go see family that I took for the last few weeks, it was definitely spiritual travel, and we might get into that. But I know Brad, you
Hmm.
kind of had this as an idea. I mean, where do you want to start with it? Because I know there were a couple things we
Yeah.
wanted to talk about to let people know because traveling is a little different than when you're at home, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, we've talked about through previous episodes about things like rituals that you might have at home. Maybe you get up in the morning and you light a candle and say a prayer, or you wash your hands a certain way. You have some certain kind of a thing that you do, a process, a ritual that you go through. And when you leave, when you go on vacation, sometimes that can throw things off. So one
Hmm.
thing I think we could talk about is, how do you kind of keep going with some of your spiritual practices when you're not at home? When you don't have a sacred space, an altar space that you work with, or maybe you can't take some of your larger pieces, like maybe I know you've got a hand pan drum, and let's say that was something that you every morning got and played. That's probably a little big to be taken on a trip, especially if there's flying involved or whatnot. So, how do you still maintain some of these practices and some of these spiritual things that you do, despite the fact that maybe you don't have all the tools that you would normally have,
Yeah.
or you had to change things up a little bit, but still maintain that. Um, so that's one thing. Another one I think we can talk about is determining where you go. Obviously, you had family that kind of was the reason for you leaving and going where you were. But a couple of years ago, to about almost 2 years ago now, my family took a vacation, and it was just kind of a hey, let's go someplace fun, we haven't been to, and to talk about maybe how we came up or I came up with the idea of the location for that and why that really kind of played into kind of a spiritual meaning for me.
Hmm.
And there's other things like, protecting ourselves when you're out and about with other people and all the fun stuff like that we could talk about. So, I guess maybe we start the beginning is like, how do you know where to go? You know, again, you had family that was taking you someplace specific, but if you're just taking a vacation, how do you decide where you want to go? What would be a good place to spend a week or, 2 weeks or, however long you're going.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because I mean, I live in Sedona, and a lot of people come here specifically. I mean, there's something special about Sedona. It's not for everybody, but a lot of times people will choose a place like Sedona or Asheville, that you've been to, or
Mhm.
maybe some places like the Grand Canyon or other sacred sites like Stonehenge in the
Mhm.
UK or other different places like that, Egypt, right? And so I think
Vegas.
I
Yep.
think part of it is I'm going to give kind of a weird answer here, is it doesn't really matter. And let me explain why. It can, if you have a particular purpose or intention, then maybe it does matter. But I'll give you an example. When I was still living in LA, I was, I lived kind of close to an airport. We were kind of like, a few miles between a commercial airport and a military base. And so we'd have a lot of, flight traffic, helicopters, other stuff. We didn't really hear the jets from the commercial airport that much because of how the flight path usually went.
Mhm.
But there was one day when I just thought, you know what? I just need some peace and quiet. I want to just go out. I want to get in the mountains. I want to, have some quiet time where I can just kind of meditate and do whatever I feel like I want to do. And so I get in the car early one morning. I mean, there's national forests and everything not very far from LA. So I drive to a place where I'd been before, and I went there, and of course the road happened to be closed, right? And so it's like, okay, I guess I'm not going that way today, right? Even though that was my intention. So I drove a little further south because there's only a couple of places there where you can get up into the mountains from LA. So I drove to kind of the next closest area to get up there. So I drive all the way up. It's a beautiful drive. I get to the top of this hill and there's kind of a pull off area, right? And so I pull in there and there's one or two cars. And so I just kind of pull off. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to kind of wait until they go and everything's going to be peaceful. And I'm just looking out over the valley and it's beautiful. And so I do that. I kind of, wait, they leave, I get out and I go over and I sit on this rock. And all of a sudden the ground starts shaking. And okay, it's LA, right? Where we having an earthquake?
Right. Right. Yeah.
No, no, it was motorcycles. It was like an Asian bike club, and there were about 50 or 60 motorcycles that showed up on that little quiet space where I was at. And it wasn't they were doing some kind of a remembrance because they had a picture of a person, and so they all had kind of come up and were doing their thing. And so it's like, okay, well, I guess this is not very quiet for me to be able to do, so I'm gonna drive somewhere else. So I go and I drive, another place, and I find this place where I can pull off on the highway, and it looks like there's a trail that goes back in. I'm like, perfect, right? So I can park,
Mhm.
I'll walk back in, I'll be by myself. And so I kind of walked back in. It was like a little ravine area that kind of stops because it goes into the side of the mountain. And there was like a
Mhm.
little, a spring kind of coming down. I could hear the water, it was
Perfect
so
spot. Yeah.
nice. Perfect spot, right? So I sit down and I kind of close my eyes. I'm just sitting there quietly, and all of a sudden, vroom, vroom, right? So I'm still close enough to the highway that I can hear all these cars going by. And so methodically, it's like, but again, you can, use that in your meditative practice as, the sounds that I hear make me go deeper and deeper and kind of build it into the
Mhm.
whole process, right? And so I'm sitting here and that was kind of okay. And then all of a sudden a car pulls off where I pulled off. And it was about four late teen, early 20s girls. And they were cackling, 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 making all this noise. And guess what? Where I was sitting, it was kind of surrounded by the rock.
Mm.
And all of their voices were like bing, 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 bing everywhere, right? So after
Mhm.
a while, I'm like, screw it. I'm going back home. So I get in the car, I go home, I sit out on my back porch, and guess what? Much quieter than the places I tried to go in nature
Mhm.
to get quiet, right? And so I think that's, just kind of one side is I know a lot of times we feel like we have to go somewhere to have some of these experiences, but you might ask yourself if you really do, because I've found many times that actually just taking the time in my own home or in my own space here is often, just as good as going somewhere else. Now, obviously, I've gone to other places and I've done other things too, but I think that's an important part, for people to think about is you don't necessarily have to go somewhere to have these experiences.
Yeah. No, I mean, I can go right on my back porch on the deck and sit out there, we've got 5 acres and trees, and so I can sit out there, and it is, we are far enough away from the highway, so I don't usually get much of the going past like you did. And so sometimes I'll hear birds. There's roosters a couple houses down, but just I can sit out in nature and I don't need to go anywhere necessarily to have that. I can just go out my back door and there it is.
Hmm.
So I mean that's a good point that you don't have to travel necessarily to have these experiences, to have these moments.
Hmm.
Sometimes just sitting on your back porch or in a little space inside your house, even,
Hmm. Hmm.
especially like we've had rain the past couple of days. And so just being able to sit inside and, kind of take in everything in the quiet sometimes is just as great. Um, but sometimes it's good to get away too. Like you
Well,
said,
yeah,
there's things,
and I
reasons
and
to
I
do that. And,
yeah, and I think you've probably got a good story with that, from a couple of years ago. I mean, so how did you
yeah.
decide where you were going to go for the little trip?
Yeah. So we were trying to decide where we wanted to go on vacation. Like we haven't gone on a family vacation for a couple of years, since the pandemic kind of shut everything
Mhm.
down. So we were kind of ready. We want to go someplace. Um, and so we're trying to think, where would be someplace kind of close to here in Ohio that we could drive to that wouldn't be too far away. And for some reason, I had started to hear other people talk about it was coming up. Yeah, the word, Asheville, North Carolina. And I didn't think just shrugged it off, whatever. But then I'd hear it come up in maybe Facebook group, people would talk about it, or the name would come up. And eventually it kind of hit and I was like, all right, I'm getting hit with Asheville, North Carolina for some reason. So I need to see why. So I kind of looked into it and and it seemed like a really ideal spot for what we're looking for. Someplace quiet where we could be out in nature, we go hiking in the mountains. But yet it's still a big enough city that there are things that you can do in the city. There's restaurants, there's museums or different places like that that you can stop. So it wouldn't be like out in the total boonies out nowhere, but we'd still be able to go out and have peace and quiet and do our own things because that's ultimately kind of what we wanted. We just wanted to be able to do our own things and whatever and have some time. And so started to figure out, okay, what are the things to do in Asheville around the area, where we go, what might kind of stuff we do. And so that really kind of started focusing on that area, which again, I had never thought about in the past. Like that was not even on my radar. Um, until I started hearing this and then started looking into it and learned about, kind of the idea that there are different kind of vortexes in that area and, different kind of things that it would be sound like a really good spot for kind of some of the stuff that we wanted to do. And so, um,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah, because I think it's a good example because again, for people that are listening, if you're wondering where to go, just kind of ask yourself the questions and then just start paying
mhm,
attention. Just like in Brad's case, he started hearing people talking about Asheville. Oh, interesting. Probably not a coincidence that people all of a sudden started talking about this place, for you to
mhm,
go. And I think, again, there's a lot of beautiful places to go in this world. There's a
mhm,
lot of very spiritual and very powerful, energetic places on this earth. And part of it, I think, too, is, as you're thinking about it, what kind of an experience you want to have.
mhm,
Because every place, on my big 5,000 plus mile trip the last 2 weeks, we went through a lot of states in the US, and every city, every state has a different feel and energy to it.
mhm,
And I was much more aware of that this time. There were certain places that we could not get out of fast enough. There was an energy that was just not good, that we wanted to be rid of that as quick as possible. And literally,
mhm,
you cross the state line and we felt a change. I mean, literally, some of the times when we would drive, we would hit a state line and we could physically feel a difference in the energy. And
mhm,
I'll give you another example that I like I said, I live here in Sedona. It's a beautiful place. It's a very powerful and masculinely charged energy here. Okay. And so a lot of people can't take it. A lot of people can't handle the intensity that's here. And again, if you're only here for a day or two, you might not notice it. If you're here for a week or two and you're sensitive to energy, you're definitely going to feel it, right? There's an intenseness to this place. A friend of mine just one of my friends lives up in the Upper Peninsula in Michigan, right on Lake Superior. And so I have a friend that lives up there, another friend that just drove up to see her and spent about a week or so with her. And he kind of explained the difference of like Sedona, where he lives too. It's like this intense, masculine, go strong kind of energy.
Mhm.
And sitting on the lake next to Lake Superior was like this calm, loving, inviting, feminine energy, right?
Mhm.
And he could very much tell the difference between these two places. So, again, maybe that's one thing for, people to
Yep.
consider is, what kind of energy do you want to be in? And then just allow yourself to be guided to know where to go,
Mhm.
because it's not right for everybody, right? I mean, there's certain places
Mhm.
that are better for one person than they are for another person, right? And I remember there were, certain parts of Oklahoma just felt wonderful. And again, I'm not sure why, if some of it's the, Native American influence there. There were certain parts like you know, West Virginia was my 49th state to visit. And since I was so close to it, we popped over the border. And I'll tell you again, it was going from Virginia into West Virginia. It was just a different feel. And literally all we did was, I mean, it was like 20 miles away, but going up
Mhm.
over the top of the mountain and down on the other side, it was a completely different energetic feel to it. I noticed it, my partner noticed it, and then
Mhm.
we had to get back in to go our own way. But there's different places for you to kind of think about what kind of energy do you want to be in and where do you feel like you're being called to go.
Yeah, yeah, and Asheville was that calming feminine energy there.
Mhm.
Um, like we were there and like I kept on trying to like I'm like, okay, I'm gonna see if I can like feel the energy and like try to feel a difference. And the whole time I felt disappointed because I'm like, I'm not feeling like all this energy, like I'm expecting like something different or whatever like that. And it's because I was looking for the wrong thing. Like I was looking for this more amped up masculine kind of visceral
Mhm.
sort of a thing. And instead it was very calm and just
No,
peace.
come here, Brad. Let me just stroke you. You can just cuddle right
Yeah,
here, sort of a
pretty
thing.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like
Yep.
to the point where like the day that we had to leave, I actually cried because we had to leave.
Yeah.
Like I was so like I didn't want to leave that feeling.
Uh-huh.
Which and actually that was the same feeling that I got when we left Maui. Was like I was kind of sitting there on the beach, kind of tearful because I had to leave that. Because I didn't want this the energy, the feeling was just some place that I felt very home and comfortable with.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, because the feminine energy helps you feel that home and comfort.
yeah,
It's like being hugged by your mama, because that's what it is, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's the same kind of energy when you think
Mother
about it.
Earth, yeah,
Yeah, and so yeah, that's
yeah,
interesting thing for people to think about.
yeah,
I think again practices,
hmm
and this is one too where I think obviously I've dealt with this. I haven't traveled as much the last few years, but I've traveled a lot in my life.
Jason is a world traveler after all.
Yeah, and this 2 week trip was the first time really where I had been away from home for that long at one stint. And so, again, there's certain things that you can take with you. I mean, obviously, I took my jewelry with me, and we can
Mhm.
get into some of that with the protection stuff, later too, potentially. So things like jewelry that you wear,
Mhm.
clothing that you wear, some of that stuff you can kind of take with you. But to drag around large craniums or big geodes or things like that is not very practical,
Mhm.
especially if you're flying on a plane. And we
Right.
were driving, so we had a little bit more latitude on that. But there's a lot of things even from a food standpoint, a lot of supplements
Mhm.
or certain types of foods that I try to eat every day or incorporate in. And some of that, because we were driving, we could take with us, right? And so we
Sure.
didn't, we only ate out in restaurants, I think 3 times over the 2 weeks, for
Wow.
3 meals, because we pretty much took our own food with us, and that was on purpose. Both so we were getting what our body needs and what we've chosen to eat, but
Mhm.
also so we don't risk, any kind of illness or other stuff by being around people and in restaurants and potential, food issues with some of those places. But it's harder if you have kind of a set routine,
Mhm.
right? That on the road, and especially when I was driving, I was, the driver for most of the time. I wasn't doing anything other than driving, or was I? Because there was another thing that comes in, right? Because I could do
Mhm.
something different when I was driving than I normally would do here at home, and we'll talk about that maybe later.
Mhm.
But I think, what I find from people is they get so worried about, oh, I've got all these different practices, and if I don't do them for a few days, then the earth
The
is
world's
going
going
to
to come to
fall
an end.
apart. It's
Right.
going to come to an end, and oh my gosh, now I'm no longer. Well, no, that's not the case, right? I mean, it's you can put a pause on certain practices, um, that you can't do on the road. You know, there's some things that you still can do on the road, and again, you just have to kind of figure out what that is. I mean, I'm not going to take my full size craniums with me necessarily, but I have little pocket craniums that I could take with me, right? And
Mhm.
so you just have to kind of decide, what you're going to do, but don't feel like if you aren't able to do some of the regular practices that you do every day for a couple weeks, the world is not going to an end. You're not
Mhm.
going to thwart your spiritual progress either,
Right.
because there's other things that you can do, right, that you normally wouldn't do when you were at home. So
Sure.
again, I'm physically behind the wheel driving for, 10 or 12 hours a day. Well, I've got a lot of things that I can do, like listen to audiobooks.
Mhm.
I can just practice being in a meditative state while not meditating. So most of the time when I'm driving, if we're not listening to an audiobook, I am not thinking. I'm just there. Right. And so I'm in this meditative state while I'm driving safely.
Which is very important. Yes. That,
Yes, I
obviously.
mean, I'm being safe because obviously, my attention is on the road and where it needs to be, but the
But you're
rest
being
of my
present like that
attention,
way.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm present that way, and the rest of my intention is not the monkey in the tree. I'm not allowing my mind to tree monkey me, the rest of the time. And so for
Mhm.
hours and hours and hours during the last 2 weeks, I was much more in a state of mindful presence than I am in the normal day when I'm at home and I've got work to do and I got to go wash the dishes and I got to go do
Yep.
this and I got to run this errand and
Mhm.
all that kind of stuff. And those things are kind of ruminating in my head. Plus, when you're gone like that, often you're able to just, I mean, I put an out of office message and I was pretty much gone. I thought about work only for an hour or so, on different days when it was things I needed to take care of. So that monkey part of the 3D was not with me most of the
Mhm.
2 weeks, too.
Yeah, and that was one of the best parts of when we went to Asheville was just being able to put all that stuff going on at home out of my head. Worrying about the bills and worry about the house and worry about work and all that kind of stuff. When you're hiking up a mountain, you're not really thinking about that stuff, right? You are focused on what you're doing. You're enjoying the scenery. You're in the moment of taking one step before the other. Say making sure you stay hydrated. All these other things that you're doing. You're not worrying about all this other 3D stuff that, like you said, the monkey mind tends to chatter and gibber away at. And so for me, that was one of the really important things about going out is to get away from everything else. And one of the benefits of that. And obviously, I did not have the nearly extent of driving that you did to be able to work on those kind of things, but still time just to kind of sit and kind of process kind of internally and work through things and like I said, just kind of being mindful and present with stuff. That in itself is a benefit of going on vacation, regardless of where you go. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it allows for other opportunities, right? I mean, honestly, I don't leave my house very much because I don't have to. And I prefer to be home than to be out. But when you're on the road, you're kind of forced to be out more. And I think, for me, especially on this trip, it just reminded me, regardless of where one might live, we all live in our own little bubbles.
Hmm.
And we forget how the rest of the world lives. And so as I was driving around, like I said, I mean, I don't know how many states we went through, but it was quite a difference and quite a difference in socioeconomic standing from some of
Hmm.
the places that we went to. I mean, we usually, we stayed at less expensive hotels, usually in smaller cities, right, wherever we felt like we needed to stop. And so we were staying in a lot of these maybe socioeconomically depressed areas a little bit more. Because some of the little towns in the middle of America, you kind of forget how people live or what it's actually like there. And so for me, the travel opportunity is to see how other people live and be that much more grateful for
Hmm.
what I have and for how I live, and understand and kind of connect in a way with how other people live. And it's like, oh yeah, that's right, people do live like this, right? Or you
Hmm.
know, and so I think that, and you're put in these different situations that you normally wouldn't be put in. And so especially when you get out of your house, it's like, what's really going on here, right? These different interactions that you're having. What's really going on here? What's really happening? And is there a bigger spiritual reason for what's going on? And I'll give you an example. On the way back, kind of when we hit Arizona, we were on native land and we hit Navajo Nation and a hellacious rainstorm happened while we were there for a certain number of miles. Why? Well, there was a reason, right? And taking notice of those kinds of things or things that are a little bit out of the ordinary, travel is a great way to have those things come into your mind more,
Hmm.
right? Because you get out of your normal routine. And so you can start to see things and realize that, oh, isn't that interesting? I wonder what that really means. Or, well, that argument I just had with somebody, what was that really about? Because it wasn't about what the argument was about, usually, right? And I had example after example after example of this on this whole trip, right? It's just like, something happened, but something else was really going on spiritually, etherically, outside of the 3D while we were playing this thing out in 3D. And so travel just gives you an opportunity, I think, um, to to see the world a little bit different, to be more grateful,
Hmm.
to notice some of these things. And I think, I mean, obviously I've been well traveled, and I've seen how people live all over the world, what they believe. Um, and some people don't have that opportunity. Some of the places that we drove through, these people have never left probably a 20 to 50-mile radius of where they were born. They don't know anything else other than the reality of the bubble that they're living in. And I think, as part of our spiritual awakening, the more exposure we can get outside of our bubbles, right, the more we actually learn and grow, the more we're empathetic and compassionate to people who are different than us, the more we can be accepting and loving of people who are different than us, right? Because that gets back to the whole
Mhm.
connectedness that we've talked about so much of the time before. If you're
Mhm.
only with the same people who believe the same thing and, drink the same Kool-Aid all the time, you're never going to get that full, rich experience of what's really going on in this world.
Yeah, it's like living in an echo chamber. All you
Yep.
hear is just the stuff that you're saying and those around you, and
Yep. Yeah.
yeah. But
So that's why I think, travel is so important. But I think we talked about protection, which I think is important for people that we can um, talk about towards the end here as we kind of wrap up, probably. But because there are, when you go out into the world, when you're outside of your home, your little environment where you're at, there's things that are going on. There's other energies that are going on, that
mhm.
are out there, and there's people or things that want to attack you in a way. Um, not to scare anybody or do anything, but it's if you can protect yourself, why not? Right? As
Mhm.
opposed to picking up maybe negative energies from places or things where you're at. And so I don't know, Brad,
Yeah,
if you have some different ways that you kind of do that, to talk about, and I can share a few as well, because this is just like where to go for people. Is it's like
sure.
we're going to share some things, but y'all have to figure out what is appropriate or
Mhm.
feels right for you, because there's
Yeah,
lots of different ways to do this.
sure. Yeah, no, I mean, I've had a couple instances, and one was when I was in Asheville. I went into particular, it was actually a crystal shop, and walking around, and all of a sudden I just felt like really hot and heavy, and like I just kind of overcome with something, and like I needed to get out of there.
Mhm.
And so what it was, I don't know, but I knew I had to leave. And as soon as I walked out the door, all of a sudden it was like a cool breeze came, and the heat, the pressure, whatever like that was gone.
Mhm.
And so sometimes when you feel that, the response, the correct answer, I think, is to get out of the situation. Like you feel something just feels off. It feels wrong. Like in my case, I felt kind of overheated and kind of heavy, and like I knew I had to just leave, like, and escape that space. There was something going on there. I had another instance sometime last summer, I think, when we was more of a local place around here. There was a shop we were in, it's an antique store. We walked in, and all of a sudden, like, I started feeling warm. My heart started beating fast. Like my watch actually beeped at me and said, "Hey, your heart's beating fast. Is everything okay?" Like it was getting a little worried there and stuff
Yeah.
at me. And I looked around, and I couldn't find what was going on. I started feeling kind of, kind of queasy a little bit. And again, I had to get out of that space. And as soon as I got out and I walked a little bit and got some air, the feeling started going away. But sometimes, kind of things like happens. And for me, a lot of it is just getting out of the environment. If I can tell something's going on, move away, find
Mhm.
someplace else. But I know that you can't always do that. Sometimes you can't get away from the things. And
Yeah.
that's where I think you talked about, different jewelries and things like that that you might have on that may be able to protect. And I know there's particular kind of crystals or things that can help particularly repel different things, or kind of create kind of some protective barriers and things like that around you. And some of that kind of stuff can help when you're wearing that and out in public with
Yeah.
others and things like that.
Yeah. And again, I'll go here a little bit first just to kind of explain, like when um in Brad's examples, especially right here, right? The crystal shop and the antique shop. Everything is energy and everything has energy.
Mm.
And so, whether you believe it or not, doesn't matter, but it's true that everything around us has energy. And
It's
so
physics.
things
Yeah.
like antiques, crystals, some of the different things like that all carry their own kind of energy. And depending on what those artifacts or things were used for or who had possession of them,
Mhm.
they pick up some of that energy as well. So I'll give you an example. There's a shop here in town that I go into every so often because it has some interesting things, but it's kind of a resale place. And some of the artifacts that are in that store have been used for dark purposes. And you can feel it. You can feel some of the different things. And so again, when you go in there, it could be energies from the things. Um, in that particular shop, there are two people who are usually behind the counter. One person is kind of neutral, the other person, dark.
Mm.
Okay. And so that's why sometimes when you go into shops or different places like that, it can be energy from the things or from beings maybe attached to certain things, depending on how they were used. Or it can be the energy being shot at you, if you will, from somebody who is not well meaning. Okay. And especially in a lot of the spiritual places in the world, like Asheville, Sedona, some of these other places, it attracts all kinds and it's a mixed bag. And there's people here from both teams. Okay. There's people here from both teams. So I want you to think about, like in Star Wars, it shows like, when they go into the bar and there's all the, the,
The
the,
cantina. Yep.
the cantina, right? And there's like some good people and there's other people kind of eyeing it, or, kind of thing.
Mhm.
Well, it's kind of like that in life in general, right? Or when you go to the airports
Sure.
or anywhere else, it's a mixed bag. There's a lot of really good people that are working in the light, that are loving. There's people who are hateful, vengeful, that want to hurt you, and they may not realize it or not. But when just like if you were to go out into battle, you're not going to go out naked, right? You don't just grab a sword and go out of the house naked.
Right.
Okay.
Sword and loincloth. Let's do
So
this. Yeah.
let's go, right? No, you're going to do some things to probably help protect you. And the biggest thing to protect you is your intention.
Mhm.
All the artifacts and the other stuff doesn't doesn't matter if the intention isn't there, and you can do a lot just with your intention. And so a very simple thing to do is just to envision and have an intention of a bubble being around you and around your loved ones in a white or golden light color. And you can set that intention and kind of imagine it being there, and that will be a protection to you just with your intention, right? And so don't feel like if you get out somewhere and you need help, or that you can't, think about that or do that as well, even without any of the other things that are there.
Mhm.
Um, from a protection standpoint, your left side is the weakest side. Your left side is your weak side. So don't let people come up on your left side. Okay. You can also lock your fingers,
Mhm.
is another way, right? Because energy comes in and it comes out through our extremities and our fingers. You can lock. So those, again, if you're watching, you lock your thumb under your ring finger, like this. All right. So sometimes I'll walk around with my hands like this. Nobody really knows it, but I'm kind of locked up. Right. There are different jewelry that you can use. I have certain jewelry that has been um, consecrated for specific purposes, some of which are protection that I wear, right? But you don't necessarily have to have that either, right? Um, but some other simple things you can do. Rose oil is a great protectant, right? So I have a little like rollerball kind of thing, like the old deodorant rollerball kind of things, but like little,
Hmm.
that has rose oil in it. And so sometimes when I go out, I'll just put some rose oil on myself. I've carried a couple of rose petals with me in my pocket before. There's a lot of protection in roses. It's a highest frequency plant on the earth. The rose and the beings associated with roses will protect you again if that's your intention. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to have it, but having the intention and then doing something in the 3D, like carrying a rose petal with you, wearing a piece of jewelry, it amplifies it because you're physically uh, 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 ritualizing in the 3D your intention in the other dimensions. Does that make sense? Or is that like that even made any
It
even
made sense
sense?
to
Does that make
me.
any sense, Brad?
But again, I don't, for the listeners or those watching here, I mean, the key is intention. I mean, that's
It's
really what it
intention.
comes is
It's
intention.
intention.
These other things are just tools that can help maybe amplify that intention a bit. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the intention of protecting yourself, of locking yourself down, of keeping those things that may wish to cause harm to you, keeping them away. Um,
Yeah, and even again, some of the simple things like washing your hands.
mhm.
I don't know, a lot of people use like the hand sanitizer, which I don't like because there's a whole bunch of other stuff in it. But we just spray rubbing alcohol. We have a little squirt bottle in the car. Every time we go out or come in, it's both from a 3D protectant standpoint, but it's also, again, with intention. It's an act of I'm cleansing myself of the energy from that place that I just came from. I'm letting it go, right?
Yep.
And there were a few times on my trip where, again, it was we got to one particular truck stop. I usually like to stop at kind of these truck stop areas because they usually have cleaner bathrooms and safer area anyway. And there was this one, and it was like we were in the Twilight Zone. It was like the interactions with the people, the way the cars were going, everything was like off in this place. It was eerie. It was just off. And so as we left, I cleanse myself and leave all of the energy from this place here, right?
Mhm.
And I just kind of did that with my hands, right? Again, I'd washed my hands and sprayed my hands, but I kind of made a little intention
Mhm.
and physical manifestation of that. And the minute that we left and got back on the highway, felt better. Just like you felt better the minute that you walked out of those stores.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, and you brought up a good point too about once you're on the way, when you get back, to kind of clean yourself off because you're
Mhm.
carrying all the energy of all the places you've been, all the people you've been around. And some of that is maybe it's something you don't really want to have hang around you.
Mhm.
And so it's getting rid of some of that, cleaning that off, cleansing some of that energy off you, so you don't
Yeah,
carry it
and
around.
and again, I mean, if you want to, that's why a lot of times people will smudge themselves when they come into their homes.
Mhm.
After they've been out, I like to wash my hands. I have a spray and some different things that I'll use at different times. But it's you get dirty out in the world. We just do, right? Physically, we get dirty. Our hands get dirty. Our bodies get dirty. Whatever. Well, our spirits can a little bit too. And so, just like if you go out and you work hard in the field all day, and you come back home, well, you're going to be a little dirty. You might want to take a shower and wash off all the grime and dirt from whatever activity you were just doing. Even like if you were hiking and it was just sweating, right? You come home
Hmm.
and often you feel like I want to take a shower. Well,
Yep.
that's kind of what you're doing here, only it's on a spiritual level. Yeah.
Yep. Cool. So a lot of different travel tips. Maybe we should start like a travel agency here to help people with on their spiritual travel and stuff. Um,
And like I
and
said, there's a whole bunch of other different protection things that you can do too, but we don't want to make this too long today. Maybe we'll talk about that
yeah,
other times. But
and I
and
apologize.
it's
I
oh,
would
and
say I
I was gonna
apologize for those who kind of came in thinking that, oh, we're talking about spiritual travel. So like, like visiting different planets and dimensions. Like I apologize, that was not what we're talking about today. That's another episode. Um,
well,
but
who says we're not doing some of that anyway? But anyway, yeah,
yeah,
that probably be a good
that's
topic
that's
for the future too.
a
Yeah.
different day. So well, anyway, thank you guys for listening. Appreciate you traveling with us today on this episode. Hopefully that we're only giving you guys that positive energy and giving you some ideas and tips and things to make your travel a little bit more pleasant. Um, and we look forward to catching you on the next episode and the next stop along your journey.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week. We'll see you later.